You know how some years it feels like jobs are just everywhere? And then other years, man, finding a good one is a real challenge. Well, that feeling we all get, it's directly tied to the health of the entire economy, which, of course, brings up a really big question. How in the world do you take the pulse of an entire country's economy? I mean, think about it. We're talking hundreds of millions of people, countless businesses, all buying and selling stuff. We need some kind of single, clear yardstick to measure all that activity. And as it turns out, we actually have one. There is an official yardstick for all of it. It's that one number you're always hearing about on the news, the one politicians are always debating. Yeah, it's called gross domestic product, or GDP. And it is, without a doubt, one of the most important economic stats in the world. So let's really dig in and break down what it means. All right, first up, what exactly is GDP? Well, at its very core, it's a way to measure a country's income and how much it's spending. And here's the cool part, it measures both of those things at the exact same time. The total income of everybody in the economy and the total amount everybody is spending. So how can it possibly measure both at once? Well, just think about it for a second. Every single transaction, no matter what it is, has a buyer and a seller, right? Every dollar you spend at a coffee shop is a dollar of income for that coffee shop. So it stands to reason that if you add up all the spending in an economy, it has to equal all the income. They're just two sides of the very same coin. Okay, so here it is, the official textbook definition. Gross domestic product is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time. Now that might sound a little dry, maybe even simple, but trust me, every single word in that sentence is super important. To really get what GDP is all about, we've got to pull this thing apart, piece by piece. Let's start with market value. I mean, you can't just add one apple and one orange, or in this case, one car and one haircut. It just doesn't work. So what GDP does is it uses market prices, basically what we're all willing to pay for stuff, to put everything into a common unit, dollars. So if a new car costs, say, $30,000 and a haircut costs $30, that car adds 1,000 times more to GDP. Simple as that. All right, next up is a really, really crucial word, final. GDP only counts the final product. Here's a great example. Think about a greeting card. A company like Hallmark buys paper to make the card, right? Well, GDP doesn't count the value of that paper when it's sold to Hallmark. It only counts the value of the finished card that you buy in the store. And why is that? Because the cost of the paper is already baked into the price of the card. If we counted both, we'd be counting the paper twice. This whole final thing is all about avoiding double counting. Next, goods and services. This one's pretty straightforward. GDP includes both the tangible stuff, the goods like your phone or your groceries, and the intangible stuff, the services. We're talking about things like your Netflix subscription, a visit to the doctor, or that concert you went to last month. All of it, tangible or not, is economic activity. Then we have produced within a country. This part is all about geography. It's about what's made inside a country's borders, period. So a car built by a Japanese company like Toyota, but in a factory in Kentucky, that counts toward US GDP. But a car built by an American company like Ford, but in a factory in Mexico, that counts towards Mexico's GDP. See, it's all about where it's made, not who owns the company. And finally, the last piece, in a given period of time. This is a really important one. Think of GDP like the amount of water flowing into a bathtub, not the total amount of water that's already sitting in there. It measures the economic flow over a specific interval, usually a quarter, so 3 months, or a full year. It's not a snapshot of a country's total wealth. It's a measure of its economic output during not specific window of time. Okay, so we've got the definition down. Now let's see what actually makes up that big final number. Economists have a pretty neat way of sorting all that economic spending into 4 main buckets. And it all comes down to this simple little formula. Y equals C plus I plus G plus NX. Here, Y is just another name for GDP. And what this equation tells us is that every single dollar spent in the entire economy has to fall into one of these 4 categories, C, I, G, or NX. So what are they? Well, C is for consumption. This is the big one. It's all the spending by households, that's you and me, on everything from food to movies. Then you've got I for investment. Now listen up, because this is key. In economics, investment does not mean buying stocks or bonds. It means businesses buying new equipment or building new factories, or even families buying a newly built house. Next is G for government purchases. Pretty self-explanatory. That's spending on things like roads, schools, and the military. And finally, NX is for net exports. You just take the value of everything we sell to other countries, our exports, and subtract the value of everything we buy from them, our imports. Okay, this next part is hugely important. Let's say you hear on the news that GDP went up. Does that mean we're actually producing more stuff, or did everything just get more expensive? It's a critical question, and to answer it, we have to understand the difference between the sticker price GDP and the real GDP. And this is where we get into the difference between nominal GDP and real GDP. So nominal GDP is the one that uses current, today's prices. But real GDP, well, that one uses constant prices from some fixed point in the past, what economists call a base year. By doing that, it basically strips out the effect of inflation. This gives us a much truer picture of whether we're actually making more things. And for that reason, when you hear economists talking about economic growth, they are almost always talking about real GDP. This little example with hot dogs and burgers makes the difference so clear. Just look at the nominal GDP column. It skyrockets from $200 to $1,200 in just 2 years. You'd think the economy grew 6 times over. But hold on, a huge chunk of that is just because the price of hot dogs and burgers went way up. Now, look over at the real GDP column. To get these numbers, we pretend the prices never changed. We use the 2010 prices for all 3 years. And what do we see? Actual output only grew from $200 to $500. That's the real story. The economy did grow, for sure, but nowhere near as much as the sticker price numbers would have you believe. All right, so we've spent a lot of time on what GDP is and how we measure it. But it's just as important, if not more so, to talk about what GDP isn't. Because for as powerful as this number is, it is definitely not a perfect measure of how well a society is doing. And you know this famous quote from Senator Robert Kennedy back in 1968 just captures this critique so perfectly. He said that GDP measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. He argued that it doesn't tell us anything about the quality of our children's education, or the strength of our communities, or the beauty of our art. It counts our economic output, sure, but it doesn't count our soul. And this really gets to the heart of the problem. For instance, GDP is great at counting all the stuff we produce and sell. But what if making all that stuff creates a ton of pollution that damages our environment? Well, GDP doesn't subtract anything for that. In fact, and this is the really weird part, the money we then spend to clean up that pollution, that actually gets added to GDP, making it go up even more. It's a bizarre twist. And the list goes on, really. GDP puts zero value on our leisure time. I mean, if we all started working 80-hour weeks, GDP would go through the roof. But would any of us actually be better off? Probably not. It also completely ignores all the valuable work done at home that doesn't involve a paycheck, like cooking meals or taking care of kids and elderly parents. And it tells us absolutely nothing about how all that income is distributed. Is it all going to the top 1% or is it spread out? GDP has no idea. This is why you hear about other metrics, like the Human Development Index, that try to paint a fuller picture by including things like education levels and life expectancy. So after hearing all that, you might be thinking, should we just scrap GDP entirely? Well, not so fast. Because despite all these very real limitations, it turns out that GDP is still a surprisingly useful, even powerful indicator. Here's why. When you look at the data from countries all around the world, a really clear pattern just jumps out at you. Countries that have a higher GDP per person also tend to have, almost without fail, higher life expectancies, better literacy rates, cleaner water, you name it. The connection between a bigger economy and a better standard of living is just, it's undeniable. And that really brings us to the final takeaway here. Is GDP a perfect measure of happiness or well-being? No, absolutely not. It doesn't measure our health or our education directly. But what a large GDP does measure is a country's ability to afford the things that lead to a good life. Things like better hospitals, better schools, and a safer environment. It may not measure what makes life worthwhile, but it measures our ability to get a lot of the ingredients for one. So, at the end of the day, GDP is a flawed tool, but it's also a vital one. It tells us a huge amount about our economic lives, but it doesn't tell us the whole story. And that kind of leaves us with one final big question to chew on. We know GDP measures our economic output, but what should we use to measure our national progress?